The black sedan pulled into the gas station just as the sun began to set over the small town of Millbrook. Inside sat a man who had dedicated his entire life to serving his country. General Thompson stepped out of his car, his green army dress uniform crisp and perfect. 3 silver stars gleamed on his shoulders, and rows of colorful ribbons decorated his chest. Each ribbon told a story of courage, sacrifice, and honor. At 52 years old, General Thompson commanded respect wherever he went. He had served in 3 different wars, led thousands of soldiers, and earned every medal through blood, sweat, and determination. Today he was traveling to Washington for one of the most important meetings of his career. The Pentagon needed him for a classified briefing that could change military strategy forever. But right now, he just needed gas. As he walked toward the station, General Thompson noticed how people stared at him. Some looked with curiosity, others with something that felt less friendly. He was used to this. Being a black man in a military uniform often drew attention, especially in smaller towns where people didn't see many high-ranking officers. The gas station was busy with evening travelers. Families stopping for snacks, truck drivers grabbing coffee, and teenagers hanging around the parking lot. General Thompson moved with the confidence that came from years of leadership. His posture was straight, his steps measured. Everything about him screamed military discipline. Inside the station, he bought a bottle of water and some energy bars for the long drive ahead. The young cashier's eyes went wide when she saw his uniform and rank. She had never seen a real general before, especially not one shopping in her small store. "Thank you for your service, sir," she said quietly, her voice filled with genuine respect. General Thompson smiled warmly. "Thank you. It's my honor to serve." Outside, he began filling his tank. The Pentagon meeting was still 3 hours away, and he needed to arrive sharp and ready. Lives depended on the decisions that would be made in that briefing room. He thought about the reports he had studied, the strategies he had developed, and the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. But he had no idea that his biggest challenge of the day wouldn't come from enemy forces or complex military operations. It would come from right here at this simple gas station, from someone who was supposed to protect and serve. Across the street, Officer Bradley was finishing his evening patrol when his radio crackled to life. Someone had called in a suspicious person at the Millbrook gas station. The caller claimed there was a black man in what looked like a military costume, acting strange and making people uncomfortable. Officer Bradley had been with the Millbrook Police Department for 15 years. He had a reputation for being tough, maybe too tough. His file contained several complaints about excessive force and inappropriate behavior, especially toward minorities. But somehow he had always managed to keep his job. As he drove toward the gas station, Bradley's mind was already made up. He had seen plenty of people pretending to be military heroes, stolen valor cases that made him angry. In his experience, real soldiers didn't usually show up in small towns wearing dress uniforms. This was probably just another fake trying to get free meals and special treatment. He pulled into the parking lot and immediately spotted General Thompson. The man was tall, dignified, and wearing what certainly looked like an expensive military uniform. But Bradley's mind was clouded by prejudice and assumption. He saw what he expected to see, not what was actually there. General Thompson finished pumping gas and was getting ready to leave when he noticed the police car pulling up. He didn't think much of it at first. Police often stopped by busy locations during their patrols. But something about the way the officer got out of his car, something about his aggressive posture, made the general pause. The evening air was getting cooler, and the parking lot lights were starting to flicker on. Other customers continued their business, unaware that they were about to witness something that would shock them all. Some were already pulling out their phones, sensing that something was about to happen. General Thompson had faced enemy fire, made life-or-death decisions, and commanded respect from world leaders. But nothing had prepared him for what was about to unfold. In just a few minutes, his entire world would be turned upside down by ignorance, prejudice, and the abuse of power. The stage was set for a confrontation that would expose the worst of human nature, but also eventually bring out the best in those who stood for justice. As Officer Bradley approached with suspicious eyes and hostile intentions, General Thompson stood ready to face whatever came next with the same dignity and strength that had carried him through decades of military service. Officer Bradley walked across the parking lot with heavy steps, his hand resting on his service weapon. His face was hard, his eyes filled with suspicion and something uglier. General Thompson watched him approach, maintaining the calm composure that had served him well through countless dangerous situations. "Excuse me?" Bradley called out, his voice sharp and demanding. "I need to see some identification." General Thompson turned to face the officer fully, his military bearing evident in every movement. "Good evening, officer. Is there a problem?" "Yeah, there's a problem," Bradley shot back, stepping closer than necessary. "We got calls about someone impersonating a military officer. You mind telling me what you're doing here dressed up like that?" The words hit General Thompson like a slap. Dressed up? He looked down at his uniform, the same uniform he had earned the right to wear through years of sacrifice and service. The ribbons on his chest represented battles fought, lives saved, and a commitment to protecting the very freedoms this officer was supposed to uphold. "Officer, I'm General Thompson with the United States Army," he said calmly, reaching slowly for his wallet. "I'm traveling to Washington for official business." Bradley's face twisted with disbelief and anger. "General? Yeah, right. You expect me to believe that? Real generals don't stop at gas stations in small towns. They have people for that. Sir, if you'll allow me to show you my military identification—" "Don't sir me," Bradley interrupted, his voice getting louder. "I've seen plenty of stolen valor cases. People like you make me sick, pretending to be heroes when real soldiers are dying overseas." The accusation hung in the air like poison. General Thompson felt his jaw tighten, but he forced himself to remain calm. He had faced down terrorists and enemy commanders, but dealing with this officer's ignorance was testing his patience in ways combat never had. Around them, other customers began to notice the confrontation. A family with young children stopped loading groceries into their car. An elderly man pumping gas turned to watch. A teenager sitting in her car pulled out her phone and started recording. "Officer Bradley," General Thompson said, reading the name tag. "I understand your concern about military impersonation. It's a serious crime and I respect your vigilance. But I assure you, I am exactly who I claim to be. My identification will confirm this." Bradley stepped even closer, invading the general's personal space. "I've heard every sob story and excuse in the book. Nice uniform, though, probably cost you a few $100s online. The ribbons are a nice touch. Really makes it look authentic." General Thompson's hands remained steady, but inside, his heart was breaking. Each ribbon Bradley mocked represented brothers and sisters in arms who hadn't made it home. The Purple Heart on his chest came from shrapnel that nearly killed him in Afghanistan. The Bronze Star was earned by saving the lives of soldiers under his command. "Officer, I'm asking you politely to examine my credentials," General Thompson said, his voice still controlled, but carrying an edge of authority that made other customers look up. "I have official Pentagon identification, military orders, and—" "I don't want to hear it," Bradley cut him off. "Turn around and put your hands behind your back." The demand shocked everyone within earshot. A woman gasped. The teenager with the phone moved closer, making sure she captured everything. The elderly man shook his head in disbelief. "Officer Bradley, you're making a serious mistake," General Thompson said, his voice carrying the authority of someone used to command. "I am a serving general in the United States Army. I am under orders to report to the Pentagon for a classified briefing. If you'll just—" "I said turn around," Bradley shouted, his hand moving to his handcuffs. "You're under arrest for impersonating a military officer, and if you don't comply right now, I'll add resisting arrest to the charges." General Thompson looked around at the growing crowd of witnesses. He could see the shock on their faces, the confusion in their eyes. Part of him wanted to resist, to demand respect for the uniform he wore and the rank he had earned. But his military training kicked in. He knew that escalating the situation would only make things worse. "I am complying with your request under protest," General Thompson said clearly, ensuring the recording phones could capture his words. "But I want it on record that you are arresting a United States Army general without cause, without examining proper identification, and in violation of both military and civilian law." Bradley wasn't listening. His mind was made up, his prejudices confirmed in his own twisted logic. He saw what he wanted to see. A black man in an expensive costume trying to get something he didn't deserve. The confrontation had reached a point of no return. In the next few minutes, Officer Bradley would make a decision that would destroy his career, expose his department's failures, and set in motion events that would reach the highest levels of government. But right now, all he could see was his own narrow view of the world, clouded by hate and ignorance. General Thompson stood straight and proud, even as the situation spiraled out of control. He had faced enemy fire with less fear than he felt now, not for his own safety, but for what this moment represented about the country he had spent his life defending. The sound of handcuffs clicking shut echoed across the parking lot like a gunshot. General Thompson stood with his hands cuffed behind his back, his three-star uniform wrinkled now from Bradley's rough handling. The officer had shown no care, no respect, treating a decorated war hero like a common criminal. "This is unbelievable," whispered an older woman who had been watching from her car. She fumbled for her phone, joining at least 6 other people who were now recording the scene. Bradley grabbed General Thompson by the arm and started walking him toward the police car. "Come on, move it along. You can drop the act now." "Officer Bradley," General Thompson said, his voice steady despite the humiliation, "when my identity is confirmed, and it will be, you need to understand the gravity of what you're doing right now." "Save it for the judge," Bradley replied, pushing the general's head down as he forced him into the back seat of the patrol car. The same hands that had saluted flags and signed orders that saved lives were now trapped behind his back in cold steel. As General Thompson sat in the police car, he could see the crowd growing larger. Word was spreading quickly through the small town. People were coming out of stores, leaving their cars at gas pumps, all staring in disbelief at the sight of a highly decorated military officer being treated like a criminal. A young veteran who had been inside the store came running out when he heard the commotion. When he saw General Thompson in the police car, his face went white. He recognized the uniform, the ribbons, the bearing of a real military leader. "Hey," the veteran shouted at Officer Bradley. "That's a real general. I served under his command in Iraq. You're making a huge mistake." Bradley turned around, his face red with anger and embarrassment. "Get back or you'll be arrested too. I don't need civilians telling me how to do my job." But the veteran wouldn't back down. "Sir, I'm telling you, that man is General Thompson. He saved my unit when we were trapped behind enemy lines. He's a genuine American hero." "I said back off," Bradley yelled, reaching for his pepper spray. The crowd was getting more upset by the minute. People were shaking their heads, talking angrily among themselves. An elderly man who looked like he might be a veteran himself was particularly upset. "This is disgraceful," he said loudly. "That man is wearing medals I recognize. That's a Purple Heart, a Bronze Star. You don't get those from costume shops." Inside the patrol car, General Thompson could hear every word. He watched through the window as Bradley called for backup on his radio. The officer's voice was shaky now, probably beginning to realize that maybe things weren't as simple as he had thought. "Control, this is Officer Bradley. I need backup at the Millbrook gas station. I've got a subject in custody for impersonating a military officer, and we've got a crowd forming." The dispatcher's voice crackled back through the radio. "Backup is 20 minutes out, Bradley. Can you handle the situation until then?" Bradley looked around at the growing crowd of angry citizens, all pointing phones at him, all questioning his judgment. "I'll manage," he replied, but his confidence was clearly shaking. A middle-aged woman approached the patrol car and knocked on the window. She was trying to talk to General Thompson, to offer some kind of support. Bradley immediately moved to intercept her. "Ma'am, step away from the vehicle. This is an active police matter." "That man doesn't deserve to be treated like this," she said firmly. "I don't know much about military ranks, but I know respect when I see it, and that man has earned more respect than you're showing him." More people were gathering now. The parking lot was filling up with cars as word spread through the small town. Social media was already buzzing. The teenager who had been recording from the beginning was live streaming everything, and her viewer count was climbing rapidly. "This is crazy," she was saying into her phone. "They just arrested what looks like a real army general for no reason. The whole town is here now and nobody can believe what's happening." General Thompson sat quietly in the back seat, maintaining his dignity despite the circumstances. He was thinking about the Pentagon briefing he was supposed to attend, about the classified information that was waiting for him, about the decisions that needed to be made. His absence would be noticed soon, and when it was, people would start asking questions. He was also thinking about his soldiers, past and present, about the young men and women he had led into battle, who had trusted him with their lives, about the families of fallen soldiers he had visited, the medals he had pinned on brave hearts, the flag ceremonies he had attended, all of that service, all of that sacrifice. And now he was sitting in the back of a police car because one ignorant officer couldn't see past the color of his skin. But General Thompson had faced worse situations than this. He had been surrounded by enemies, trapped behind enemy lines, faced impossible odds, and he had always found a way through. This situation would be no different. Truth had a way of coming to light, and when it did, Officer Bradley would have to face the consequences of his actions. As he sat there, General Thompson noticed something in his side mirror. A black SUV was pulling into the parking lot, moving slowly through the crowd. Then another one appeared. His security detail had finally caught up. The first black SUV pulled up slowly, its tinted windows reflecting the evening lights of the gas station. Agent Rodriguez stepped out of the driver's seat, his experienced eyes immediately taking in the scene. 20 years of protecting high-ranking military officials had taught him to spot trouble from a mile away. And this situation was screaming danger. Behind him, Agent Chen emerged from the passenger side, already reaching for his federal identification. They had been following General Thompson at a discreet distance, standard procedure for any Pentagon-bound general carrying classified clearance. When the general's GPS had stopped moving for more than 10 minutes, they knew something was wrong. "Sir, this is Agent Rodriguez with Pentagon Security," Rodriguez called out as he approached Officer Bradley. His voice was calm but carried unmistakable authority. "I need you to release General Thompson immediately." Bradley turned around, sweat beading on his forehead. The situation was spiraling out of control, and now he had federal agents to deal with. "And who are you supposed to be? Let me guess, more fake military?" Agent Chen stepped forward, holding out his credentials in a leather folder that caught the light. "Federal agents, officer. That man in your patrol car is General Thompson, a 3-star general with the United States Army. He's under Pentagon protection and has classified clearance. You need to release him now." The crowd around them had grown even larger. People were pressing closer, phones held high, capturing every word of the conversation. The teenager who had started the live stream was now broadcasting to over 5,000 viewers. And the numbers kept climbing. "I don't care what fake IDs you've got," Bradley said, his voice getting higher and more desperate. "I know stolen valor when I see it. These people are all working together, probably part of some elaborate scam." Agent Rodriguez looked at his partner with raised eyebrows. In all his years of service, he had never encountered such stubborn ignorance from a law enforcement officer. "Sir, I'm going to need you to step aside and release the general. This is not a request. You don't have jurisdiction here," Bradley shouted. "This is my town, my arrest, and I'm not releasing anybody until my backup gets here and we sort this whole thing out." Inside the patrol car, General Thompson was watching the confrontation unfold. He could see the stress on his security detail's faces. These were professional men who had protected generals and admirals in war zones, and now they were dealing with a small-town cop who refused to listen to reason. Agent Chen pulled out his secure phone and made a quick call. "Control, this is Chen. We have a situation at our current location. The general has been unlawfully detained by local law enforcement. Officer refuses to acknowledge federal authority or examine credentials. Request immediate support." The voice on the other end was sharp and clear. "Support is already en route. Pentagon has been notified. ETA 15 minutes. Meanwhile, the crowd was getting more agitated. The young veteran who had tried to intervene earlier was now talking to other people, explaining what he knew about General Thompson's service record. His voice carried across the parking lot. "I'm telling you, that man led Operation Desert Shield. He's got more combat experience than most people have years on this planet. He saved my entire unit when we were pinned down by enemy fire. This is a disgrace to everything our military stands for." An older woman in the crowd shouted at Officer Bradley. "You should be ashamed of yourself. That man has probably forgotten more about serving this country than you'll ever know." Bradley's radio crackled again. This time it was his supervisor, Sergeant Williams. "Bradley, what's your situation? We're getting calls from all over town about some kind of incident at the gas station." Bradley grabbed his radio, his hands shaking slightly. "I've got a suspect in custody for military impersonation. Now I've got what appear to be federal agents claiming he's legitimate, but I think they're all part of the same con." There was a long pause before Sergeant Williams responded. Bradley described the suspect's uniform and rank. Army dress uniform claims to be a 3-star general, has a bunch of ribbons and medals. Another pause. Longer this time. Bradley, what's the suspect's name? Claims to be General Thompson. The silence that followed was deafening. Even through the radio, Bradley could hear his supervisor's sharp intake of breath. Everyone listening could sense that something significant had just happened. Bradley, Sergeant Williams's voice came back, much more serious now. General Thompson is a real person. He's one of the most decorated generals in the Army. If you've arrested the real General Thompson... The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Officer Bradley's face went pale as the implications began to sink in. Around him, the crowd was murmuring, sensing that the tide was about to turn. Agent Rodriguez stepped closer to Bradley, his voice low but firm. Officer, you now have confirmation from your own department. General Thompson is exactly who he says he is. Every second you keep him in that car is a federal offense. I strongly suggest you make the right choice here. But Bradley was frozen, caught between his stubborn pride and the growing realization that he had made the biggest mistake of his career. In the distance, the sound of approaching sirens could be heard. More vehicles were coming, but they weren't the backup Bradley had been hoping for. The convoy of black SUVs arrived like a storm rolling across the horizon. 4 vehicles in perfect formation, their engines synchronized, their presence commanding immediate attention. The crowd in the parking lot instinctively stepped back as the vehicles arranged themselves in a protective formation around the gas station. From the lead vehicle stepped General Harrison, a 2-star general whose reputation preceded him everywhere he went. His uniform was immaculate, his bearing unmistakable. Behind him came Colonel Davis, the Secretary of Defense's Chief of Staff, a woman whose calm exterior hid nerves of steel and a mind sharp enough to cut glass. Officer Bradley watched in growing horror as more federal agents emerged from the other vehicles. Military police, Pentagon security, and officials whose exact roles were classified but whose authority was absolute. This wasn't backup coming to help him. This was the full weight of the United States military arriving to clean up his mess. What in the world is going on here? General Harrison's voice boomed across the parking lot. His eyes immediately found General Thompson sitting in the patrol car, and his face darkened with anger that could have melted steel. Agent Rodriguez quickly approached, snapping to attention despite being a civilian. Sir, General Thompson was unlawfully detained by local law enforcement approximately 30 minutes ago. The arresting officer has refused to acknowledge federal authority or examine proper credentials. General Harrison's gaze shifted to Officer Bradley, and the temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Officer, are you telling me that you have arrested a 3-star general of the United States Army? Bradley's mouth moved, but no words came out. His earlier confidence had evaporated completely. Standing before him were some of the most powerful people in the American military, and they were not happy. Colonel Davis stepped forward, her voice crisp and professional. Officer Bradley, I am Colonel Davis with the Secretary of Defense's office. General Thompson was en route to a classified Pentagon briefing when this incident occurred. His absence has already triggered emergency protocols. Do you understand the gravity of what you've done? The crowd had grown silent, sensing they were witnessing something historic. Phones continued recording, but people had stopped talking. Even the children seemed to understand that something very serious was happening. I thought, Bradley stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. You thought what? General Harrison's question cut through the evening air like a blade. You thought you'd arrest one of America's most decorated generals based on your own prejudices? You thought you knew better than his federal security detail? You thought you could ignore proper identification procedures? From another vehicle, Lieutenant Colonel Rodriguez emerged with a folder full of documents. Sir, I have General Thompson's complete service record here. 3 tours in Iraq, 2 in Afghanistan, recipient of the Distinguished Service Cross, Purple Heart, Bronze Star with Valor, and 17 other decorations. He currently oversees strategic operations for the Joint Chiefs of Staff. The weight of these words settled over the parking lot like a heavy blanket. People in the crowd began shaking their heads, some wiping away tears. The young veteran who had tried to help earlier was openly crying, overwhelmed by seeing his former commander treated with such disrespect. General Harrison walked slowly toward the patrol car where General Thompson still sat handcuffed. Through the window, the 2 men made eye contact. No words were needed. Years of military brotherhood spoke louder than any conversation could. "Release him immediately," General Harrison ordered, his voice leaving no room for argument. Bradley fumbled with his keys, his hands shaking so badly he could barely fit them in the lock. When he finally opened the car door, General Thompson stepped out with the same dignity he had maintained throughout the entire ordeal. "General Thompson," Harrison said formally, "on behalf of the Pentagon and the Secretary of Defense, I apologize for this inexcusable treatment." "Thank you." "General Harrison," Thompson replied, rubbing his wrists where the handcuffs had been, "though I believe the real conversation needs to be about how this happened in the first place." Colonel Davis approached Officer Bradley with a folder in her hand. "Officer, you need to understand what you've just done. You have unlawfully detained a general officer, interfered with classified military operations, and violated federal law. This incident will be investigated by the FBI, the Department of Justice, and military police." Bradley's supervisor, Sergeant Williams, had finally arrived on scene. When he saw the Pentagon officials, his face went white. He had served in the military himself before joining the police force, and he immediately recognized the catastrophe his officer had created. "Sergeant Williams, I presume?" Colonel Davis addressed him directly. "I need you to understand that this incident represents a complete breakdown of professional judgment and possibly civil rights violations. We will be conducting a full investigation into your department's policies and training procedures." The crowd was beginning to disperse, but slowly. People were still recording, still talking among themselves about what they had witnessed. The teenager who had been live streaming had over 20,000 viewers now, and the video was being shared across social media platforms faster than anyone could count. General Thompson straightened his uniform and checked his watch. "General Harrison, how much time do we have before the briefing?" "We can delay it, sir." "Under the circumstances, no delays," Thompson said firmly. "Too many people are depending on the decisions we need to make tonight. This incident, as serious as it is, cannot interfere with our duty to protect this nation." As the Pentagon officials prepared to escort General Thompson to Washington, Officer Bradley stood alone in the parking lot, suddenly realizing that his life as he knew it was over. The crowd looked at him with disgust and disappointment. His fellow officers avoided eye contact, and in the distance, news vans were already arriving, drawn by the social media explosion that was turning this small-town incident into national news. The silence in the parking lot was broken by the arrival of 3 more police cars, their red and blue lights painting everything in emergency colors. Officer Bradley's backup had finally arrived, but instead of reinforcements, they brought witnesses to his downfall. Officer Martinez was the first to step out of his patrol car. A 15-year veteran with a spotless record, he took one look at the scene and immediately understood the magnitude of the disaster. Pentagon officials, federal agents, military police, and a crowd of angry citizens all focused on his colleague standing alone near the gas pumps. "What in God's name have you done, Bradley?" Martinez whispered as he approached his fellow officer. Chief Williams arrived moments later, his face grave as he surveyed the chaos. He had received 3 phone calls during his drive to the station, one from the FBI, one from the State Attorney General's office, and one from the Pentagon's legal department. Each call had made it clear that his department was about to face the biggest crisis in its history. "Chief Williams," Colonel Davis approached him with military precision, "I need to inform you that this incident is now under federal investigation. The FBI will be taking over the criminal aspects of this case, while the Department of Justice will be reviewing your department's civil rights compliance." Chief Williams removed his hat and ran his hand through his gray hair. He had been dreading this day for years, knowing that Bradley's behavior would eventually lead to something catastrophic. There had been complaints before, settlements paid quietly, warnings ignored. Now the chickens had come home to roost. "Colonel, I want you to know that Officer Bradley's actions do not represent the values of our department," the chief said, though his words sounded hollow even to himself. General Harrison stepped forward, his voice cutting through the evening air. "Chief, with all due respect, this officer has a history of complaints. Our preliminary investigation shows at least 12 formal complaints filed against him in the past 5 years, most involving racial profiling and excessive force. How is that not representative of your department's values?" The question hung in the air like an accusation. Officer Martinez and the other arriving officers looked uncomfortable, some stepping back as if to distance themselves from their colleagues' actions. A news van pulled into the parking lot, followed quickly by two more. Reporters were jumping out with cameras and microphones, drawn by the social media storm that was already making this incident national news. The teenager's live stream had reached 50,000 viewers and was climbing. Officer Bradley finally found his voice, though it came out as a desperate plea. "I was just doing my job. We get calls about stolen valor all the time. How was I supposed to know he was real?" General Thompson, who had been speaking quietly with his security detail, turned to address Bradley directly. His voice was calm but carried the weight of absolute authority. "Officer Bradley, in my 30 years of military service, I have learned that ignorance is never an excuse for injustice. You had multiple opportunities to examine my credentials, to listen to witness testimony, to verify my identity through proper channels. Instead, you chose to see what your prejudices told you to see." The crowd that had gathered murmured in agreement. Many of them had watched the entire incident unfold, had heard Bradley dismiss evidence and ignore facts that contradicted his assumptions. Chief Williams stepped closer to Bradley, his voice low but firm. "Officer Bradley, you are hereby suspended pending full investigation. Turn in your badge and weapon immediately." "Chief, you can't do this to me," Bradley protested. "I've got 15 years on this force. I've got a family, a mortgage." "You should have thought about that before you decided to arrest a general," Officer Martinez said quietly. The disappointment in his voice was shared by every honest cop who had ever had to work alongside Bradley. Colonel Davis opened her briefcase and pulled out a stack of documents. "Mr. Bradley, you are being formally notified that you are under investigation for violation of civil rights under federal law, unlawful detention, and interference with official military business. You will be contacted by FBI agents within 24 hours. The reality of his situation was finally sinking in for Bradley. This wasn't just a suspension or a reprimand. This was criminal. Federal criminal charges that could send him to prison and destroy his life completely. Agent Rodriguez approached Chief Williams with his own set of documents. "Chief, we're also opening an investigation into your department's training procedures, complaint handling processes, and supervision protocols." This incident didn't happen in a vacuum. General Thompson checked his watch again. The Pentagon briefing was still salvageable if they left immediately. But before he went, he had something to say to the crowd that had gathered to witness this injustice. "Ladies and gentlemen," he called out, his voice carrying clearly across the parking lot, "what happened here tonight is unacceptable, but it is not uncommon. Too many of our citizens face this kind of treatment, based on the color of their skin rather than the content of their character. I wear this uniform to protect all Americans regardless of race, and I will not let this incident be forgotten." The crowd erupted in applause. People were crying, cheering, some calling out, "Thank you for your service." "And we support you, General." A local news reporter managed to get close enough to ask a question. "General Thompson, how do you feel about Officer Bradley's actions tonight?" General Thompson paused, choosing his words carefully. "I feel sad. Sad that in 2025 we still have to fight these battles. Sad that someone sworn to protect and serve chose to judge rather than investigate. But I also feel hopeful because look around you. Look at all these people who stood up for what's right. That gives me faith in America." As the Pentagon convoy prepared to leave, Officer Bradley stood alone next to his patrol car, stripped of his badge and facing an uncertain future. The crowd was dispersing, but many people were still recording, still sharing the story that would soon be seen by millions. Chief Williams watched his former officer with a mixture of anger and pity. "Bradley, you've brought shame on this badge, on this department, and on yourself. I hope it was worth it." But Officer Bradley had no answer. He could only watch as General Thompson climbed into the federal vehicle that would take him to fulfill his duty to the nation, while Bradley himself faced the consequences of a choice that would haunt him for the rest of his life. By midnight, the video had exploded across every social media platform imaginable. The teenager's live stream, which had captured the entire incident from beginning to end, had been viewed over 2 million times. Clips were being shared on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok faster than anyone could count them. The hashtag #Justice for General Thompson was trending worldwide within 6 hours. People from every corner of the globe were expressing their outrage at what they had witnessed. Military veterans, civil rights activists, and ordinary citizens were all sharing the same message. This kind of treatment was unacceptable in modern America. Sarah Chen, an investigative journalist with the Washington Post, was one of the first major reporters to pick up the story. She had been scrolling through social media when the video appeared on her timeline, and she immediately recognized its significance. Within an hour, she was on the phone with sources at the Pentagon, the FBI, and the Department of Justice. "This isn't just about one bad cop," she told her editor during an emergency meeting. "This is about systemic problems that go much deeper. I've already found records of 12 previous complaints against Officer Bradley, and the department settled at least 3 civil rights lawsuits in the past 5 years." The story broke on the Washington Post's website at 2 a.m. with the headline, "Decorated Black General Arrested While in Uniform, Pentagon Officials Outraged." By dawn, every major news network in the country was covering the story. On CNN's morning show, military analyst General Roberts was visibly angry as he discussed the incident. "I've known General Thompson for 20 years. He's one of the finest officers I've ever served with. To see him treated like a criminal while wearing the uniform he's earned through blood and sacrifice is beyond disgusting." Fox News brought on former police chief Anderson to discuss the law enforcement angle. "There's no excuse for what Officer Bradley did," Anderson said firmly. "Any competent officer would have examined the general's credentials, spoken to witnesses, and made proper inquiries. This was prejudice, pure and simple." The story reached international audiences when BBC News picked it up, running it as their lead story with the headline, "American General Arrested by Racist Police Officer." News outlets in Germany, France, Japan, and dozens of other countries were covering the incident, many using it to highlight ongoing racial tensions in America. Social media was on fire with reactions from celebrities, politicians, and ordinary citizens. Actor Samuel Jackson tweeted, "30 years of military service and this is the respect he gets? Shameful." Singer Alicia Keys posted, "This breaks my heart. When will it end?" But it wasn't just celebrities speaking out. The video had struck a nerve with millions of people who had faced similar treatment or knew someone who had. Military families were particularly outraged, sharing their own stories of discrimination and prejudice. Lisa Washington, whose husband had served 3 tours in Iraq, posted a lengthy Facebook message that was shared thousands of times. "My husband came home from war with PTSD and shrapnel scars, and he still gets followed around stores like he's a criminal. Seeing General Thompson treated like this brings back every painful memory we've tried to forget." The Pentagon issued an official statement at 8 a.m., calling the incident completely unacceptable and announcing a full review of military-civilian relations protocols. Secretary of Defense Margaret Collins personally called General Thompson to express her support and ensure he had all the resources needed for his legal response. By noon, the story had reached the halls of Congress. Senator Rodriguez, a member of the Armed Services Committee, announced he would be calling for hearings on police treatment of military personnel. "When our most decorated generals can't travel safely in their own country while wearing their nation's uniform, we have a serious problem that requires immediate action." The Millbrook Police Department was in complete crisis mode. Chief Williams held a press conference at 10 a.m., but it went badly from the start. Reporters peppered him with difficult questions about Bradley's history, the department's complaint procedures, and their training on military recognition. "Why wasn't Officer Bradley terminated after previous complaints?" one reporter demanded. "How do you explain the failure to properly train officers to recognize military credentials?" asked another. Chief Williams stumbled through his answers, clearly unprepared for the intensity of the media scrutiny. His promise to fully investigate the incident rang hollow when reporters had already uncovered years of ignored warning signs. Legal experts were weighing in on television shows and news articles, explaining the serious federal charges Bradley could face. Former federal prosecutor Maria Santos appeared on multiple networks to explain the potential consequences. "This isn't just a case of false arrest," she explained. "When you unlawfully detain a military officer, especially one with classified clearance, you're potentially interfering with national security operations. The charges could range from civil rights violations to obstruction of official military business." The incident was also sparking broader conversations about racial profiling and police accountability. Civil rights organizations were using the story to highlight statistics about discriminatory policing practices. The NAACP issued a statement calling the arrest A perfect example of how racial bias clouds judgment and leads to injustice. Even international military officials were commenting on the story. A British Army general tweeted, "Have worked with General Thompson on NATO operations. He is an officer of the highest caliber. This treatment is shameful and reflects poorly on American values." By evening, the story had been covered by every major news outlet in America and dozens internationally. The video had been viewed over 10 million times across all platforms. Officer Bradley had become the face of police prejudice, while General Thompson had become a symbol of dignity in the face of injustice. But the real impact was just beginning. The incident was sparking conversations in homes, schools, and workplaces across the country. People were talking about racism, about respect for military service, about the need for police reform. A single act of prejudice in a small-town gas station had become a catalyst for national soul-searching about the values America claimed to uphold. 3 months after that night at the Millbrook gas station, Officer Bradley sat in a federal courtroom facing the consequences of his actions. The FBI investigation had been thorough and damning. Federal prosecutors had uncovered a pattern of behavior that went back to his earliest days on the police force. Judge Patricia Williams, a no-nonsense federal judge with 30 years on the bench, read the charges with gravity that filled the courtroom. "Mr. Bradley, you are charged with violation of civil rights under federal law, unlawful detention, and obstruction of official military business. How do you plead?" Bradley's lawyer, a public defender who had tried to negotiate a plea deal for months, whispered something in his client's ear. But the evidence was overwhelming. Video footage, witness testimony, and a paper trail of ignored complaints had built an ironclad case against him. "Guilty, Your Honor," Bradley said quietly, his voice barely audible in the packed courtroom. The sentence was swift and severe. 3 years in federal prison, permanent loss of law enforcement certification, and a lifetime ban from carrying firearms. Judge Williams looked directly at Bradley as she delivered her ruling. "Mr. Bradley, your actions that night brought shame not only on yourself but on every honest police officer in this country. You had the power to protect and serve, and instead you chose to discriminate and persecute. The uniform you wore represents justice, but you became the very injustice that uniform is meant to fight." In the gallery, General Thompson sat with quiet dignity, watching justice finally being served. He had spent the past 3 months working tirelessly to turn his painful experience into positive change. The Pentagon had assigned him to lead a new initiative on military-civilian relations, and he had embraced the role with the same dedication he brought to everything else. The Millbrook Police Department had been completely restructured. Chief Williams had retired in disgrace, replaced by former military police officer Captain Rodriguez, who implemented sweeping reforms. Every officer was required to undergo extensive training on military recognition, civil rights, and de-escalation techniques. More importantly, the department had established a civilian oversight board with real power to investigate complaints and discipline officers. The days of complaints being filed away and forgotten were over. The community now had a voice in how they were policed. The changes weren't limited to Millbrook. The incident had sparked a national conversation that led to real policy changes. Congress passed the Military Recognition Act, requiring all law enforcement agencies to receive federal training on military credentials and proper treatment of service members. The Department of Justice announced a new initiative to investigate police departments with patterns of civil rights violations. The program, dubbed Operation Equal Justice, had already opened investigations into dozens of departments across the country. General Thompson found himself becoming an unexpected spokesman for police reform. He testified before Congress, spoke at civil rights conferences, and worked with law enforcement agencies to improve their training programs. His message was always the same: respect for human dignity must be the foundation of all policing. Justice isn't just about punishing those who do wrong, he told a packed auditorium at Howard University. It's about creating systems that prevent injustice from happening in the first place. We must demand better from those who wear the badge, just as we demand better from those who wear the uniform. The video of his arrest had never disappeared from the internet, serving as a permanent reminder of what can happen when prejudice overcomes professionalism, but it had also become a teaching tool, used in police academies and civil rights workshops across the country. Officer Martinez, who had worked alongside Bradley for years, became one of the most vocal advocates for reform within law enforcement. He spoke openly about the warning signs he had ignored, the complaints he had dismissed, and his own failure to hold his colleague accountable. We all knew Bradley had problems, he admitted during a training session for new recruits, but we stayed silent because it was easier than confronting him. That silence made us all complicit in what happened to General Thompson. Never again. The teenager who had live-streamed the incident, now a freshman in college studying journalism, had turned her accidental moment of citizen reporting into a career path. She continued to document police interactions in her community, holding law enforcement accountable through the power of social media. A year after the incident, General Thompson returned to Millbrook for the dedication of a new community policing center. The same gas station where he had been humiliated was now across the street from a facility designed to bring police and citizens together. "This center represents hope," he said at the dedication ceremony. "Hope that we can learn from our mistakes, that we can be better than our worst moments, and that justice delayed is not justice denied." Chief Rodriguez, the new police chief, presented General Thompson with a ceremonial key to the city. "General, your dignity in the face of injustice has made our entire community better. You could have responded with anger, but instead you chose to respond with grace and determination to create positive change." Officer Bradley, meanwhile, was serving his sentence in federal prison. Letters from his family spoke of a man finally confronting his own prejudices, attending counseling sessions, and beginning to understand the harm he had caused. Whether his remorse was genuine or simply a response to consequences remained to be seen. The broader impact of that night continued to ripple across the country. Police departments were updating their training, communities were demanding accountability, and young people were learning about both the dangers of prejudice and the power of standing up for what's right. General Thompson continued his military service with renewed purpose, knowing that his greatest victory hadn't come on any battlefield, but in a small-town gas station where dignity triumphed over hatred. The uniform he wore represented not just military service, but the ongoing fight for justice and equality that defines America at its best. The story that began with one man's prejudice had become a catalyst for change, proving that even in the darkest moments, the light of justice can prevail. Officer Bradley's moment of hatred had backfired, creating more awareness, more reform, and more progress toward the equal treatment of all Americans than years of traditional advocacy had achieved. Justice had been served, but more importantly, the seeds of lasting change had been planted.